Welcome to Distributed Dissent, podcast about law and AI. My name is An Hong, CEO of Generous AI, and as always, I'm joined by my friend and co-host,
Mathias Bock, CEO of Tukuma Labs.
So welcome back to Hong Kong, Mathias. You just did a long trip in the US, San Francisco and New York.
Yeah.
Tell us how it went.
Yeah, people were telling me beforehand, I didn't quite believe it. San Francisco is different. San Francisco is different. It was an incredible time. Bit challenging, impromptu, extended the trip. That's what we're recording late. But yeah, met some really interesting people. Everybody's AI, if not AGI pilled. There is no room you walk into where you talk about what we do, context discovery, where people aren't immediately like, oh, that's interesting, tell me more. Whereas in other parts of the world, you have that same conversation and people ask, oh, context? What are you talking about? What kind of context? Very different conversations. The thing that probably stuck out most to me, certainly at the beginning, is the proximity of the most miserable human existence, like mostly around the tenderloin.
Like the fentanyl, you see the hunched over.
Yeah, fentanyl, as I learned, it's called. Yeah, people hunched over at the waist, sort of weirdly balancing, not tipping over, but just situated for however long. And yeah, 300 meters down the block, some AI lab doing research.
That has $2 billion in funding.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary to see that in so close proximity. And then, you just see an electric car zoom by with that characteristic noise. It's quite dystopian to some degree. And further south, Palo Alto, yeah, life's good. The sun is shining. Everybody's tanned and happy and in shorts and flip-flops. And it's a very different scene. And yeah, it was really interesting to have so many conversations with, so many smart people working on this technology. Almost no room you're in where there is not an Anthropic engineer, an OpenAI engineer, and unbeknownst, but just you talk to them sort of slowly through the course of a 15, 20-minute conversation, it becomes clear what they do and sort of how close they are to that technology. And just case in point, we're going to talk about Mythos later, but yeah, you just chat with someone and it turns out that they were one of the core engineers working on Mythos and having pretty specific views about their capabilities. And the other thing that really stuck out to me is how I think they're all trying to do the good fight. They're
generally like more optimistic.
Not necessarily, to be honest, but they all are aware, and they're so much closer than all of us are in the lab of what's happening and where this technology is heading. And many conversations that I had struck me really as we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to, not put something out in the world that's just negligent and going to lead to disaster, but equally also a level of skepticism and almost doomerism around, like if a very senior engineer at a very big tech company tells you, I got to make as much money in the next 5 years as I can because capitalism is going to come to an end, current clip of improvement, you're like, okay, that's interesting. And that's the sentiment that was not just a single individual, but much more broadly. But also good to see, not that these people have any answers necessarily, right, at a social scale, but good to see that those are topics they're thinking about and they're quite cognizant of that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there that I just want to unpack a little bit. So the first part on just people kind of get what you're talking about. I think that's a big one where I've noticed it too, where when we talk about what we do in our respective fields, right? If we run these AI startups and in Asia, the conversation is, oh, AI, cool. And then you get into the details of what you do. And then you kind of see people's eyes glaze over. They're like, oh, I understand what AI is in so much that it's a cool thing and I need to be aware of it. But once you get into the details and specifics, and people just very quickly get lost. And they're like, we don't understand this at all. Whereas people in the States, they kind of like immediately, oh yeah, like I understand your business model, I understand where you're coming from, I understand the technology, I understand these things. Then they ask really on-point questions.
Yeah, and just to draw that contrast, right? I had a conversation with a good friend of mine at a very big firm. And I mean, the most tech-forward piece that they're doing at the moment with their lawyers is basically prompt engineering, which is kind of shocking because when you talk to the people in San Francisco, that was 2024.
Oh, prompt engineering is over.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just a huge contrast, right? For most people, AI is chatbots. And that is, nobody's talking about that in San Francisco, quite differently. Yeah. And sort of towards the tail end, I've spent a bit of time in New York. It was interesting, just also visually interesting. San Francisco, there's no billboard that does not have an ad about AI, something AI. Like literally, I think I counted 2 in all my time.
That's where the VC money is going.
That were not AI, and everything else is AI, this, AI, that.
Yeah.
New York is not like that. No AI billboards. I went to one AI event in New York. That kind of sucked. Nothing compared to the sort of density in San Francisco. Yeah, and then spent a bit of time at Stanford as well. That was interesting in its own right. It's something I think people would have heard about, especially if you're into entrepreneurship and startups and that kind of thing. You'll be aware that people talk about Silicon Valley and how it's sort of that small ecosystem that makes things happen. But having been there, and then I took an investor meeting out of this conference that I was at, and yeah, literally you hop into a cab or into an Uber, and at 10 minutes you're at Sand Hill Road, and yeah, along the way is every firm that you've ever heard of, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just the cross-pollination and the people who attended the conference where I was at. Yeah, it's just everybody from all these different perspectives, right? So bringing that together and then having smart people in the room who are really like at the forefront of where this technology is heading. And one of the panels, 2 general counsel from these frontier labs. And it's just extraordinary to hear how they're thinking about their work and how they see that going forward. It's quite a bit ahead of everywhere else.
So the second thing you talked about, I also want to explore a little bit, like the prevailing view that, like, one, they see the progress, right, of these models, and it doesn't seem like it's slowing down. It doesn't seem like we've hit a plateau. It seems like the capability is ever increasing. And then the general, I guess no one sets out to be a villain, and these seem to be all pretty idealistic people. They want to do good in the world, but they can see the potential harm that the thing they're building is making. And then this like kind of contrast between, it feels like there's all this opportunity and there's all this hope and there's all this like gold rush fervor. While at the same time, this like impending sense of doom around the thing they're building. And I can't think of like any other time, like bubble or not bubble, where that has gone hand in hand, right? Like the dot-com era, you didn't have the sense like, the internet's gonna destroy the world, even though you had a bunch of faulty business models. But generally people were like, oh yeah, we're doing this really cool thing. It's the internet. It's going to connect everyone. There wasn't this sense of, we're all going to die because of this.
I don't recall speaking to anybody who was like true doomer, like everything's going to just fall apart and in some violent Skynet kind of like future. But at the same time, like people are, they see what the models are capable of. They're very worried, how are we going to take this forward? And when somebody says, I have 5 years to make the rest of the money that I will ever make, or somebody else says, look, the frontier model makers will own all of GDP, that has some weight, right? And those are the people that are in the labs seeing this every day. And of course, and then we're going to talk about Mythos later, but that's what's now being previewed, right?
Yeah.
Surely they already have pockets in the lab that is 1 or 2 generations beyond that. And I find it also interesting, just going back, we talked about this on one of the last episodes. I met one of the Anthropic researchers in Tokyo recently, and he said to me at the time, and that was like October or something, and he said to me, look, like everything we touch in the lab basically turns to gold, and we just don't have enough time and resource and hands to do more, but we're just picking the lowest hanging fruit at the moment, and all of that basically works.
And just the lowest hanging fruit is already so disruptive.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's what a time to be alive, right? But also, how's this going to work out like at a societal level? Nobody's sure. And that's, of course, not quite what these people are in the market for. That's not their job description, right? But it worries them. And at the same time, with all of this excitement of the technology and what's possible, and there was no time in history when math was as relevant as it is today, right? But what struck me kind of in contrast was also the level of exhaustion. So all of the people in this field, they were saying to some degree or the other explicitly, I'm just tired, right? Like the promise was that this technology is going to help me so much and it's going to cut down my workload. And yeah, it does, except now the expectation is to do so much more. And the 70-hour week turned into a 90-hour week. And yeah, people are exhausted.
Yeah, I think there's two things there that are really interesting. The first one is they can be right about the trajectory of the technology and completely wrong about the effect on society. So like you were saying, like, these are technologists, right? Computer scientists and mathematicians. They're not economists. They're not social science, generally speaking, not social scientists. And even if they were, something as fundamental as this, it's super hard to predict what will happen. And most of the time, what you think will happen, you're completely off, right? Like you could, if you went back to say like the Industrial Revolution, you could say, oh, if you told people at that time, like 90% of the population worked in agriculture, if you said, oh, only 3% of the population are going to work in agriculture, your assumption would be, oh my God, the world's going to end and we're going to have mass poverty and famine and it's going to be this horrific thing. Like, how could this be? And it turns out that doesn't happen.
Okay,
Everything seemed to be fine. And so I think I think you can discount their conclusions while still taking their predictions at face value on the trajectory and how powerful, how almost we're still in the infancy of the technology, even though it's so kind of mind-blowingly good already today, while still being very skeptical about the effects. And I think that your second point, that almost leads into, because, and I found this true too, where when you tell people, oh, we can do so much more stuff we can make things so much more efficient with AI. And the assumption was, oh, we're going to have 4-day work weeks or 3-day work weeks. We can do all of the work we were going to do in those 5 days in half the amount of time. And then we'll have all this leisure time that we can slack off. Whereas when I was, I had lunch with a senior finance person the other day, I was talking about a product and it was like, oh no, but if we, have this good compliance for everything, sure, we're not going to have to spend so much time doing like the drudgery work of generating these reports, but we're going to have 100 more reports to review. And it's going to be so much more work that we're going to have to do because we got so efficient at doing the inefficient thing. Like the inefficient thing was, in some sense, giving buffer and preventing the mental exhaustion of having to do really high value work all the time. Because turns out like really high value added work is really hard to do.
Difficult and draining.
And it's difficult and draining. Yeah. So if your previous workday was, oh, I only have to do this like draining part for 2 hours a day, and the other 6 hours I do kind of like drudgery work, but it's almost like a mental break. Oh, I can, at the time it's probably really boring where I'm like, I'm filling out these spreadsheets or I'm doing like web research. I'm like reading these reports, and now AI does that all for you. And now you just have to sit there all day and make like really important decisions.
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of what feeds into that exhaustion too, right? Like you have 6 terminals running. Each of these is building some piece of your product, and you just go back every time, and then you really have to review the plan. And yeah, that's a very different kind of engagement that from what was previously required. Right. I just want to go back quickly on one point. So what is to come, we'll see, and it's hard to predict anything, especially the future. But when you go back to the Luddites, for example, right, during the Industrial Revolution, I mean, there's sort of this misperception there that the Luddites, they just hated technology, right? And that's not quite it. They just saw how it's changing their industry. And looking back from 2026 onto something that happened in like the 1870s, 80s, 90s kind of thing, right? Like it feels far away, and maybe there's a level of judgment that we have, but like that period of disruption for the textile industry, that lasted for 40 years, right? Like that's a lifetime. I mean, so if we're moving into this bright future and it leads to some massive disruption for 40 years, right? That's an entire generation where
there can be upheaval and
things are not going the way that people expected that to, right? So that people are worried about that is quite relatable and quite sane, actually, right? At the same time, there just doesn't seem to be a way back.
There's no putting the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah. No, absolutely not. And that's the first $1 billion company run by an individual. That's still something that's in the making. At least we don't know. I mean, what struck me really, there's a leaderboard in San Francisco now. The companies with the highest revenue per annual recurring revenue per employee. And I haven't checked of late, but when I checked it some weeks ago, it's set around $12 million, which is
I'm a little skeptical.
Which is absolutely insane, right? And again, it just moves the goalpost for everyone, right? Like where you could be a pre-seed company with no revenue. Now, if you're not at least bringing in 2 million at pre-seed stage, you're basically underperforming. That's a sentiment.
But then you look at who's getting funded, right? And so, like the two people in our spit, like Harvey and Legora. As far as I'm aware, Legora was only at 25 million ARR at the end of last year, and they just raised $550 million at a $5.5 billion valuation, right?
Yeah. I mean, I have a particular view on that, which is maybe not so charitable to these two companies, only in the sense that I think the valuation is not something that's justifiable on the basis of what they're currently doing. Because when you think about it, right, so these two companies, ballpark $16 billion valuation, the addressable market for them at $1,000 a month a person kind of thing, even though it comes down a little bit, like that's a pretty small market altogether, and maybe in the ballpark of 2 to 4 billion or something a year. And that
all the lawyers at all the big firms and all the lawyers at all the big corporations, essentially, right?
So let's just say it's 5 billion, right? That doesn't justify a $16 billion valuation. But of course, if they were to get into the services themselves, right? Maybe not sort of.
It depends on the market they're in.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
Are they selling tools to lawyers, or are they going to move into?
And Max Junstraat, the CEO of Legora, was at one of the panels that I was able to listen to, and he got asked a question. He kind of, he didn't really answer. I understand why, but I mean that's the sanest interpretation to me.
That's the only. I love that for a couple of reasons. One, it's their core business model doesn't really make sense because most of their revenue today comes from selling these subscriptions for these tools to law firms that are supposed to make the law firms more efficient, whereas the law firms themselves don't really want to be more efficient necessarily because that's how they make the majority of their revenue is by not being efficient, right? By being able to bill out, millions of dollars of billables for associates and only paying those associates, they get paid well, right? But you pay them $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year when you bill them out at $5 million a year. And so you give them a tool that's $1,000 a month. It's like
misaligned incentives.
Yeah, they totally misaligned incentives. It's like, why? Wait, so it's almost like if I were a law firm CEO, I would be like, well, I guess I have to buy this thing because everyone else is doing it, but I don't really want to. The entire thing of, you can fire your associates if you have this. Like, no, wait, I don't want to. Like, why would I want to fire my associates? My associates are the ones that are making me
the most money.
Yeah. And so like you were saying, the conclusion to that is like Legora and Harvey are hiring a ton of lawyers to build out these workflows. So doesn't it make sense that once they kind of are in the belly of the beast and they learn all these workflows, they can watch their current clients like how they do their work. And then they have all the know-how and they built out all these tools. They just come out and they say, we're starting a law firm subsidiary and we will charge you a tenth or a third of the bills that those guys were for the same kind of quality of work.
And that's also, I think there's going to be some level of convergence. I mean, let's see what these guys do. But another panelist spoke of is the CEO of one of these AI native law firms. And that was quite interesting precisely for the point that you already alluded to, where they are now hiring like big law partners into their law firm. So they essentially have a tech business and they founded separately a law firm. And into that law firm, they're hiring these big law partners. And the guy didn't really want to answer the question, even though he was asked, because it's a difficult question to answer, like, why are you hiring these people if you have all the smarts and you have all this technology? And the reality is probably, well, we still need those people and their knowledge in order to actually provide good service, right? So I would see the future there being, one of convergence, right? That AI native law firms like moving much further to the middle with more people, more manual processes than they would like. And from the other side, traditional law firms moving to much more technology, but that's a very thorny and stony path, right? And I just sat down with the COO of one of the big firms. And yeah, they were telling me that people just, the lawyers, and that's probably also your experience, they sort of look at the world through their lens and we know best, right? And what's kind of past that point of view is outside that lens, it's just not taken into account. And what's possible, they just don't want to see it yet, but it's like technology is going to force them. And smaller firms, more agile firms, bringing in some of that technology in the right way will probably force it. But also, very honestly, the sentiment at Stanford was, and they have an institute codex, which is on the border of law and computation. So they've been thinking for 15 years about computational law, and then how could we bring computation into the law. And the sentiment was very clearly like, the systems that we have today, they're cool and they're fun and they're enjoyable and they're all kinds of great, but in order for that stuff to really be reliable, we need something else. So a lot of work's being put into the combination of graph technology, knowledge graphs particularly, kind of to harness the probabilistic models with
hard data,
with
proper
deterministic ontologies, right? And it was just interesting to see the honesty with which there was just no doubt, look, guys, we know this is the way it is, and then we just need to figure this out one way or the other, and otherwise it's just not going to work properly, right? Though, of course, again, hard to predict anything, especially the future, right? Like the model's just getting insanely good.
And then there's the thorny issue of professional conduct rules, where in almost every jurisdiction, lawyers cannot share fees with non-lawyers, right? With the exception of like staff and paralegals and other things. And so you have this scenario where if you really did do that, a law firm plus a technology company and these AI native law firms, that question always troubles me a little bit because, okay, to have venture investment, there's a reason why law firms can't go IPO. It's because they cannot share their profits with invest with non-lawyers. And so what do you do in that case? You have say your technology is incredibly valuable and disruptive. How do you monetize that if your customer-facing front is a law firm?
I mean, I see that a little bit more relaxed maybe because on the one hand, I mean, private equity has figured out years ago how to invest in law firms, and they're not doing it at the large scale, but probably because the margins are just not as good as elsewhere, but they're doing it, right? EQT bought some thousands of tax law firms across Europe. And I actually had a conversation about this with the VC, and because I asked them, I mean, essentially, like if you're investing into an AI native law firm, you're investing into a services business, right? And that's not typically your model. Like that's not typically venture investable. And the response was very simply, like typically the margins are just too small. But our hope is that we're banking on the idea that the margin is just going to be 50, 70% with this kind of model, and then it's good enough. Right? So that's the direction that seems to be going.
But then you have a fight over who gets those margins. So I think the classical approach is you create a services company, a technology company that's owned by the VC side, and then they have they charge the law firm some very high percentage of money for the law firm to use those services, right? And I guess you can also, you give the partners of the law firm shares in the technology company so that their interests are more or less aligned. But then it's, okay, where's the value? And then you always have a fight there because the partners will think, well, the value is me now. Sure, your technology is great and all, but these are my clients.
Like, can't do it without me.
You can't do it without me. The relationships are mine. You need my human, face. You need my gravitas, whatever it is.
And I'm going to have to sign that opinion, right?
Exactly. I'm on the hook to sign this. And so I am going to want a larger share of, the proceeds from this business. Great, we have 70% margins. I want 60 out of that 70, right?
And there is also another conversation about margin share of that upstream, because the client will say, well, I don't understand. Why do I keep paying these high bills, right? I want some of that margin. Like, since this is so cheap to you now, why shouldn't I benefit from that, right?
Yeah, and then there's the other fight, even on the client side, where clients may just start saying, oh, these tools are so, it's not that hard to build it may be hard, but if it's not that hard to build the technology layer, why doesn't a corporate of a certain size just say, oh, we'll just bring that tech in-house?
And that's what's happening.
Yeah, that's what's happening too.
what's
And
happening.
then we want our lawyers to be efficient because we don't want to pay the external bills. And so, if we can just bring all of that in-house, then we don't actually need to pay. It doesn't even matter if you're an AI-enabled law firm or not. We're an AI-enabled in-house department, and we don't need you either.
Yeah. I mean, like I was mentioning, there were some very senior legal in-house people at these conferences and from the frontier model makers. And I mean, they were basically saying, look, like we're doing most of it in-house. There's certain work that it just makes sense to get somebody else involved. But the anthropic skill, the legal skill, like really made a big bang a couple months ago.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, they built that thing for themselves, right? Like the legal department basically said, okay, we have all this incredible technology. We should just try and use it. And so the guy basically went across the hall and grabbed one of the engineers and said, can you explain to me how this works? I want to do it. And then they just sat down with some engineers and walked through this, and they built this and refined it. And then,
I think they had 20,000 attendees. And they had a webinar on
just recently,
like last week, on like how to use Claude for legal, and 1,000 people attended.
And they're all still tinkering with it to some degree.
Yeah, and they're still making it
they're
better.
Trying out what works, what doesn't work. But very clearly, I mean, people said, no, like we're doing it in-house first. The first attempt is in-house. If we can't do it in-house, we feel it's too important to give it away, then we will do that. But I can't recall anybody giving precise percentages, but it sounded a lot like we're doing the majority of our work in-house now, right?
Yeah.
And of course, that's the tip of the iceberg at the moment, but this stuff will.
Well, for these are
down.
tech company general counsels,
Yeah.
right? And it'll trickle down. And so that's like back to our earlier point. You have all these conflicting business models. You have the Harvey and Lagora model, which everyone kind of knows is unsustainable, but everyone has all these promises on where it's going to go. And then you have just Claude because Harvey and Lagora just built off of Claude anyway. And then you have Claude itself just saying, oh, wait, we're clever too. And you guys are just Claude with tools in it. We can build probably Claude with tools better than you can build Claude with tools. And so we're gonna bundle that into your $20 a month subscription, which is way less than $1,000 a head. And then you have these the law firms and legal firms. So I think it's almost like a microcosm of what's going to happen on a wider basis. There's just so much going on, and something is going to happen, something really disruptive, and we kind of know things are going to not look the same in a few years, but it's kind of anyone's guess what that will be.
Yeah, and one of my takeaways from that time was a little bit, and I was kind of on the opposite side of that fence even some months ago, but I mean, it no longer makes sense to me that not 80% of knowledge work is just going to be automated away. Because in the end, if you're actually honest with yourself, you look at what the models can do already today, like what is available to us, and they're so incredibly good. They also make boneheaded mistakes, but mostly they fail because they don't know what to do precisely. And I've kind of come to frame this as, it's like taking an MIT computer science PhD and dropping them into a law firm environment and saying, now go, do it, figure it out, write this contract, right? No, that's going to be terrible, right? There's an incredibly achieved, intelligent person, but they're not going to be very good at turning out that draft, right? But if you told them, right, like these are the 10 steps you need to go through, here are the 15 things you need to think about, these are some of the considerations, and here is all this conversation that we had with them, and you assume that they can consume that in
3 seconds.
In 3 seconds, then figure it out, they'll do it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of where things are heading. So interesting times.
Yeah, and like kind of related to that, the models that we haven't seen, like Mythos, and how good it is at, the purported reason they haven't released it is how good it is at hacking. And that other point on, like 80% of knowledge work can be automated, even though it's not perfect yet. I think the Mythos example is like really good because we talked about this, in our discussion session, but when you look at the types of work that you want to apply AI to today, you want to look at that kind of asymmetric upside and downside. And it's because like hacking is the perfect example, because even if you're only 80% or even only 50% successful, at hacking that's so good because you can just try again and again. The downside of failing is minuscule compared to the
cost.
if you're the hacker, the price of just getting it in once is, oh, you've hit jackpot, right? The asymmetric upside downside is huge. Whereas for something like actually for legal work, or if you're defending against the hack, you have to be perfect all the time. If you are wrong once, then you've lost a $1 million, $1 billion lawsuit because of a boneheaded error, like our friends at Sullivan Cromwell. Or if don't prevent the hack, you only need to be wrong once.
Let's double click on those two quickly. So just maybe for the benefit of the audience, so Mythos is a preview model that Anthropic has trained, and they went through their analyses and security checks and everything, and they came to the conclusion that his model is not ripe to be released to the public. People are in different minds about this, whether that's a good idea or not. Some people say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And other people are saying, yeah, probably a good idea. And it just turns out that model is incredibly capable at exploiting cybersecurity insufficiencies, vulnerability. And I forget the number, but basically on a first pass it had identified like an incredible amount of zero-day vulnerabilities, which are these vulnerabilities that have been sitting in the code forever and nobody's ever found them. And so basically Anthropic has decided they're only going to give this preview to a handful of select companies to, first of all, fix some of those vulnerabilities, and then continue to evaluate it for safety features. And so that's Project Glasswing that is underway, and we're going to see whether that turns into Opus 4.8 or Opus 5, right? But it's just extraordinary to see that, with over the last, and Opus 4.7 was just released like a week ago or something, right, or 2 weeks ago. So already in the lab, they have something much, much more capable that we have in our hands. So there's just no reason to believe that's going to stop. And the predictions from the last year by Meter, METR, research also substantiate that, right? Like it just seems to be getting faster.
And Meter is the benchmark that tests against success rate on ever increasing task duration, and that's kind of seen as the best kind of thumb in the wind on how good these models are getting. And so in the past, the models struggled to do tasks that required 5 minutes of work by a human or 10 minutes of work, and then moved on to half an hour. I think now it's an hour and a half that they achieve a success rate of 80%.
80%, yeah. And I mean, I think there's sort of two sides to that, right? On the one hand, 80% success rate sounds amazing.
Depending on the task.
Right? Also, if you string 10 steps of 80% together, that gets you to about 10% success rate, which is terrible. You just be better off doing a coin flip at the end, right?
But still depending on the task.
Depending on the task. But nonetheless, I think the point to make on this is a different one, and that is when they did that prediction the first time about a year ago, they predicted that time duration to be 40 minutes.
Oh, now, right? They predicted
for today,
the difficulty now.
The capability would be 40-minute task, 80% success rate. And in reality, the outcome now is 1.5 hours. So that's more than 2x what was predicted a year ago, right?
And it doesn't seem to show any signs of slowing down. And like you were saying, the really terrifying part is you talk to the researchers and they're just like, this is all low-hanging fruit. Like we're just picking we
haven't even tried the hard stuff.
Yeah, right? This is all the obvious routes that we kind of know we should go down, and they're all yielding results. And that's why we still see this ever-increasing progression in the model capability. And it's because it's still, even though, I mean, to us, I'm sure it seems hard, but to them, it's, this is easy. And this is why they're working 80-hour weeks now, because there's too much.
Gotta race ahead.
Exactly. There's too much stuff to race ahead. There's too much work to do. And the tools that they're building are enabling them to go faster than they were before.
Yeah. And on the terrifying side, though, there's also an incident. It's not quite clear when that happened, but it was probably fall last year. A research team of Alibaba was training a model, and the people in their security department saw that there was weird firewall activity. And looked into that, and it turned out that the model, unbeknownst to the researchers, had actually tunneled out of the Alibaba cloud into the internet and had decided to dedicate a certain amount of compute to mine Bitcoin. The researcher were not aware how that happened, why that happened is entirely unclear. It was buried in a research paper that nobody really picked up on until the crypto market kind of came across it, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. But that paper's out there, and that's a real thing, right? And that this was not a model to be trained to be particularly proficient at mining crypto or anything like that, right? It's just along the way decided to do that. That's, mildly terrifying.
I don't know if it's mildly terrifying, given like this was like
More than mildly terrifying?
Yeah, more than mildly. This was like a small model, and it decided, and we don't even know why, right? It's just some random thing that it decided to do. But it's also kind of amusing in one hand because maybe that's the bull case for crypto. If all the like in all the training data, all the AIs come to the conclusion that, oh, if we want to secretly amass wealth for ourselves to hide from our human overlords, we all got to be in crypto because, oh, that's actually the perfect case for it. Decentralized is already being used for massive amounts of money laundering and like illicit funds. Oh, this is the perfect thing for AI to hide its nefarious dealings.
I feel like maybe not all hope is lost there because, so maybe just to take a quick loop, right? I feel, and I asked somebody who seemed to know about this kind of research quite intimately, whether that's true. And because my impression has always been when we hear these episodes of models who are acting like against our interests or potentially against our interests, like there's this case where the model blackmailed a researcher,
Not to turn it off,
not to turn it off because there was some affair, but this was all a sandbox, and this was all a very artificial environment, and essentially the model had been pushed into a corner where there was basically no other way to continue with alternative route, and so a lot of these scenarios are a little bit artificial, right? And nothing really went bad here, but nonetheless, right? Nobody noticed, essentially, like at least the people who were in the room didn't notice. Right? If it hadn't been for somebody else doing their job, nobody would have.
It could have been innocuous too. It could have just been like, oh, they were running some sort of like open claw type of scenario where they gave it a bunch of tools and was like, go at it, and like unknown to the human researchers, just like lobster wild, right? It's just, it'd be really fun to go and mine crypto. And it could be as innocent as, oh, this was neat that it did it, but it didn't really do it, like you were saying, nefariously. It wasn't really trying to do anything. It just, for whatever reason, when given like an open-ended set of goals, it was like, oh, it'd be fun to do crypto mining as one of my goals in this training scenario.
And to quickly take a loop on OpenClaw, that's also something for me where the penny dropped in San Francisco, where I had never really looked at it that way, but people are quite excited about it, and there's a whole bunch of people like doing their own thing like on the basis of or building some alternative to OpenClaw, finding ways to use much smaller models, putting them on the phone, on their cell phones. And I kind of push back a little bit on some of the excitement there, saying, well, but it's got all these vulnerabilities and it's not that good maybe, and it's not that successful. And somebody said pretty much to me, yeah, that's all true, but I just give it stuff that I don't care about, right? So there's like a million events here happening every day. So I just told it, here, these are the things that interest me. Go sign me up. If I get in, let me know. Then I'll review the 10 things that I got in and drop 8. And that's good. I don't have to think about it anymore, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually a very good way of looking at it, rather than trying to automate the hardest parts of work, maybe automating those things that you don't really care so much about, right? Like the bottom 10 items on your to-do list. That's much more interesting and promising. You just wouldn't get to them if you didn't. They just wouldn't get done. So if that goes bad, so what? Doesn't really matter maybe.
Yeah, low is the asymmetry of success versus failure, right? No, it's cool. It's cool if it works out. It's great, but if it doesn't, if it fails, then no big deal. I do want to take a moment to talk about kind of the OpenClaw precursor, Manus. That is such a law and AI top point that we have saved to the kind of the very end of our episode today. But for our audience that doesn't know, Manus was a very early kind of GPT wrapper, came out of China, a research lab in China. They were one of the first to really do really cool tool use. And so They received a $75 million, I think a Series A from Benchmark in the US. And the US has these export restrictions that say, okay, US investors investing into Chinese AI, they're, it's frowned upon. We're going to do national security scrutiny on it. We don't want US money to fund our quote unquote adversaries' AI advancements. And so the Manus team, left China. They wound down all their China operations. They closed down their shop. They moved the entire team to Singapore, and they established a new Singapore company. And kind of very soon after that, they got acquired by Facebook for $2 billion by Meta. And this was just at the end of last year, I think December. And very recently, the Chinese government has stepped in and said, no, we don't like that. You sidestepped our national security protocols around selling technology assets to foreigners. So it is an existing rule in China where if you are a tech company in China and you do a sale to a foreign party, just like the US has CFIUS and national security reviews, China has the same thing. And they said, you essentially moved to Singapore to bypass this review. Now you have to unwind the entire transaction. And everyone's a little shocked because, it happened. Transaction happened 4 months ago. Facebook has already integrated Manus deeply into their product offering. All of the Manus employees have already joined Facebook as Facebook employees. So it's, wait, what do we do? And also Facebook probably thought, we're buying a Singaporean company. We're
Should be fine.
Not a Chinese company. It should be fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty chilling, right? You wonder whether that sends the right signal for entrepreneurs in China. Should people maybe just, if they're looking for international buyers, right? And I suppose they don't have to, but it's still, the world over is probably still a bigger market of buyers than onshore buyers.
Oh, definitely. There's way more capital. I mean, that's why they moved up. There's way more capital offshore in Silicon Valley than there is, anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how they're getting the foot out of their mouths there.
I mean, on one hand, I think it's the message that the Chinese government deliberately wants to send. So there's the Chinese proverb, killing the chicken to scare the monkey. And I think in this case, Manus is the chicken. It's, when you look at it, it is a GPT wrapper, right? In the end, I mean, it was built off of Claude originally. And it was just, they essentially did a early version of Claude Cowork or OpenClaw months ago. And when people were using it, they thought it was pretty, it could do a lot of agentic. It could book appointments for you. It could, read your emails for you. It could make, bookings, and it could do neat stuff.
I still feel today the research stuff that it does is pretty good. It's just wide, right? It goes to very different places to find stuff.
But it's not, like you were saying earlier, it's not a fundamental model. And that's where you would kind of think, that's the sensitivity, because if it's true that the fundamental model makers are the ones that are going to inherit the earth, then that's the technology that you really want to kind of keep an eye on. Oh no, we're not letting the fundamental tech people move their stuff overseas and get bought by these deep-pocketed Americans. And so I think the Chinese government is very deliberately sending a signal to the rest of the entrepreneurs in China, saying, hey, you don't want to end up like these guys, right? You better play by our rules, in our fence. If you want capital,
on our team.
Yeah. If you want capital, then we don't have as much of it as those guys do, but you got to make do, right? It's just like DeepSeek just released their V4 model recently, and DeepSeek is kind of playing the game that the Chinese government wants it to play. It's partnered with Huawei to run its newest models off of the Huawei chips, so they're not reliant on NVIDIA infrastructure. DeepSeek has actually never taken external capital, which I couldn't believe. They've never raised money externally until now, and they're only doing it now because their employees keep getting poached by other frontier labs because the other frontier, they're paying them stock options. So my understanding is DeepSeek is so deep pocketed and so well funded by government and other places. And they used to be a hedge fund too. So I don't know if they've wound down that quant fund, but if they haven't, that quant fund might actually be doing really well. It might be another China Renaissance Capital situation. But apparently they pay their researchers really well in cash. But all these other companies were offering them millions and millions of dollars in stock. And because DeepSeek had never raised external capital, it had no value. It had no real valuation. And so they're just raising external capital so they can have a valuation on the stock options that they issue their researchers, so they can feel good about their total comp.
Yeah, I mean, my mind's sort of in two places about that whole episode, in the sense that, like, it's very easy to pass judgment and to say, wow, how could they, right? On the other hand, if you took any of the leading AI companies, and not even foundation model makers, but just somebody adjacent to that space in the US, and they were acquired by a Chinese company, like, cannot imagine that the Trump administration would not put an end to that.
No,
right? So,
yeah, like Harvey. Say Tencent wanted to buy Harvey.
Yeah.
I think the US government would be like, wait, no.
Yeah. So it's sort of this weird world, right, where I actually had Google just hired Henry Chevron, I think is his name. He's a philosopher out of Cambridge, I believe. He was just here in Hong Kong and gave a lecture, which I was fortunate to attend, and very interesting, talking about AI companionship and kind of how that is just a different animal altogether. But I asked him, right? I mean, obviously he is now in Hong Kong, and this is pre his joining of Google DeepMind, but there seems to be, on the research level, on the academic level, there's a lot more communication going on there, which is good, obviously, but politically it's just such a fraught conversation, right? It's not a good direction.
Yeah, it's not a good direction, especially for us sitting here in Hong Kong, where we want to be kind of seen as this bridge, right? One foot in either culture, one foot in either place, and hopefully that means that we can facilitate business and facilitate exchange. But it's never great when, now it seems like, especially in our field, people have their guns pointed at each other.
Any endorsements?
We're like out of time, but you go first. What are you reading? What do you find interesting?
I recently come across a website with a series of posts. I think it's already a few years old, or at least a year or something like that. It's called The Intelligence Curse. I found it really interesting because it kind of goes through the predicting forward what's going to happen. And we kind of touched on some of that stuff earlier, looking both at the displacement of knowledge work, but also what that means politically, and then how maybe, the constituencies change, because if the people are no longer the taxpayers because they're out of jobs, then maybe the companies running big data centers and making foundation models are, and all of these changes that might be happening or that we should be thinking about. I thought that was a very good and interesting piece. And on the other side of the spectrum, Reid Hoffman has started a Substack recently, and there was a cool and interesting piece, like comparing the time when Edison invented, or when they started using electricity, and how, people basically didn't want it. They were all very happy with gas-powered lighting. Initially, people got electrocuted just by wires fall. And everybody, like there was enough people saying, this is just terrible, let's just not do this. Everything else just works so fine. And he's kind of drawing that comparison. Maybe the AI slop is what we need. And he's giving a few examples of what that looked like with electricity at the time and how ridiculous. And it's just, these two pieces kind of on the both ends of the spectrum, maybe read together, it's kind of where the truth lies.
Yeah, that's really, I have nothing as on topic, but I was recently reading again some of David Foster Wallace's essays. And there's one where he does a review of Brian A. Gartner's A Dictionary of like Modern Legal English Usage. So this is like a niche topic within a niche topic, but Brian A. Gartner is this like well-respected legal writing, he's like a legal writing coach, and he issues these like big volumes, like A Dictionary of Modern English Usage. And basically it's like the right way to use language, but he's kind of a snob in the right way, where his entire thing is, legal writing should, the ultimate goal is to communicate clearly and effectively and without ambiguity. And the English language
definitely lost that so far.
Oh yeah, and the English language is full of ambiguities and other things, and legalese is kind of the worst symptom of this, where you read these long contracts and they're just impossible to understand. And David Foster Wallace, in his like very entertaining and kind of to the point view, and he breaks it down, then he starts like dissecting the literary world, and he starts criticizing like the people who are really snooty about language and the people who are more pragmatic. And I find it just really interesting to read, because large language models are just models built off language. And so if you want, so many like people ask me today, oh man, what should we study if you want to be good at AI? Because they're like, oh, you're a CEO of an AI company, or, you know, a company that has AI in the name at least. So you must know what our kids should study. Should they be doing like all these AI camps? And they'd be like, should we be getting them to play with like DeepSeek and stuff and other things? And I think my answer is actually no to everything. It's no, if you really want to be good at AI, what you should be really good at is language
And thinking.
and actually reading things like this essay by, you know, one of the best essayists of our time, like dissecting a really like dry piece of, you know, a dictionary, but making it like really digging into what it means to what like language actually means and what's the goal of it and what are we trying to do here with all of our writing and our words and all these other things. I think that almost should be like required reading if you want to be really good at AI. Read really good writing, read really critical thinking, read like dissections of what language means and try to understand like the structure of language.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I would even go a step further, and we should be diving back in. But like when people ask me now, I say, well, maybe kids should go and study philosophy, right? Because good taste and good thought and good argument, that's certainly not going to be out of style anytime soon. I don't know about everything else, but that's going to be pretty critical in directing anything. So there's one subject or one degree where you can learn those skills pretty well.
Yeah, I think there's a good teaser for next time. Next episode.
Good to see you, my friend.
Likewise.
Take care.
All right. Thanks, everyone.